The music was soft, elegant, one of those instrumental versions of a pop song you can almost recognize. The chandeliers above shimmered, casting warm light across white linen and glass centerpieces. Laughter spilled from every table, clinking glasses and polished smiles. It was the kind of wedding you see in bridal magazines, perfect on the surface. And then there was me. I sat alone at table 18, near the back, right by the kitchen doors. Every time a waiter pushed through with a tray of entrees, I felt a gust of cold air and the ache of being placed where no one would notice. My place card read Aunt Julia in gold script, but the name was the only familiar thing around me. The other people at the table, a distant cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years, a few co-workers of the groom, and one woman who kept checking her phone under the table, clearly bored. I smiled politely, tried to make small talk, but my voice felt like it was echoing from another room. Nobody met my eyes. No one asked how I knew the bride. They didn't have to. I didn't belong there, and I knew it. I was supposed to sit at table 3, with family. That's what her mother, my sister, would have wanted. That's what the original seating chart had said. I had even seen it printed neatly and pinned to a corkboard in the foyer when I arrived. Table 3. That was the plan. But when I walked into the reception hall and found my name tucked into the far corner, my stomach turned. I double-checked, thought maybe it was a mistake. Then I saw someone else, one of the groom's aunts, seated at table 3 in my place. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. She had moved me, deliberately, quietly. She didn't have to say it out loud, her actions screamed it. You're not part of this. And for the first time in years, I believed her. I looked across the room and saw her, the bride, glowing in ivory, leaning in to whisper something to her maid of honor. She laughed, tossed her head back, like someone who didn't carry a trace of guilt. She hadn't even glanced in my direction all evening. I had been with her when she took her first steps. I was the one who stayed overnight after her mother passed, making pancakes the next morning and braiding her hair with trembling hands. I gave up vacations to pay for her dance lessons, held her hand through heartbreaks, cheered the loudest when she got her degree. And now I was an afterthought, a technicality. I sat still for a long time, didn't cry, didn't fuss, just watched, listened, and then slowly I reached for my clutch. Inside was a small envelope, thick cream-colored, sealed with a rose gold sticker. That morning before I left for the wedding, I had slipped it beneath her dinner plate. Quietly, before the server set up, I'd arranged for a small favor from one of the staff. I knew someone whose daughter I once tutored for free. She owed me, and I asked for one thing: place this note under the bride's plate. No one sees it until she lifts it. At the time, I'd intended it as a surprise, a gift, a quiet reminder of all we'd shared. It included a photo of her and her mother, arms wrapped around each other, taken in my garden. On the back, I had written, "She would be proud of you. I know I am." And inside the envelope had been something more, a check. $10,000, my contribution to her wedding. I'd been saving for it for 3 years. But an hour before leaving for the ceremony, I changed the note. I kept the photo, but I rewrote the message. You made sure I sat alone. So I made sure you remembered who stood beside you when no one else did. And I tore the check in half. Now sitting there at table 18, I didn't regret it. I watched her from across the room, laughing, surrounded, adored. But something in me had gone quiet. Still, sometimes the loudest heartbreaks aren't the ones that shatter glass or scream through hallways. Sometimes they sit quietly at table 18. And sometimes they leave something unforgettable beneath a plate. She used to call me Jules. No one else ever did. It was our thing, Amanda and me. After her mother died, she clung to me like a second skin. She was 8 at the time, confused, angry, heartbroken. My sister's passing left a crater in her world. Her father tried, but grief made him small. It made me bigger than I ever expected to be. So I stepped in. I went from being the fun aunt with movie nights and marshmallow cereal to packing school lunches, attending parent-teacher conferences, sewing Halloween costumes, and wiping away tears that her father was too broken to handle. and she always came to me first. When she started high school and didn't get into the dance team, it was my lap she cried in. When she got her first period and was too embarrassed to talk to anyone else, it was me she called. And on her 16th birthday, she hugged me and whispered, "You're more of a mom than anyone." That moment stayed with me for years. So when she got engaged and invited me for lunch to tell me the news in person, I thought we're still close. She still wants me in her life. She even asked if I'd help her shop for dresses. Of course I said yes. I made her favorite lemon cake and brought along a photo album of her mother's wedding for inspiration. But slowly, subtly, something began to shift. She began talking about image more than intimacy. Guest lists became political. She told me her fiancé's family was very polished and that she wanted everything to feel elevated. I laughed at first, thinking it was just a phase. But she wasn't joking. One day, she gently suggested I not wear my usual garden hat to the bridal brunch. It's just not the vibe, she'd said, like she was choosing a filter for a photo. That was the first sting. Then came the bridal shower, which I didn't know was happening until I saw it on Facebook. Amanda beaming in a white dress surrounded by women with perfect nails and filtered smiles. No tag, no text, no call. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, Jules, I didn't think you'd be into that kind of thing." And just like that, she swept me into the corner of her life, folded me like a tablecloth she didn't want out for guests. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe I didn't belong in her new world of curated brunches and minimalist floral arrangements. But then came the registry link sent via email with a casual, "Hope you find something fun." There were no warm words. No, you mean the world to me. Just a hyperlink and a smiley face. Still, I showed up to her engagement dinner. I brought her a hand-stitched table runner made from scraps of her baby clothes, little pieces of her life sewn together by someone who had watched her grow. She opened it in front of her guests and smiled a tight smile. "Oh, homemade," she said. "Homemade." As if that were a downgrade. That night, I drove home with something heavy in my chest. Not anger, not quite sadness. It was something harder to name, grief maybe, for a relationship that had quietly died without a funeral. But I still held on. Because love doesn't always let go when it should. And so I said yes when she asked if I'd help her address envelopes for the wedding invites. We spent 3 hours at her dining room table, sipping coffee and sticking stamps. Her words felt warmer that day. She even said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed her. But then, weeks later, came the seating chart. The final blow. The proof that love without respect isn't love at all. Because it takes intention to move someone to the back of the room. It takes awareness to demote someone from family to formality. She didn't just forget me. She erased me and assumed I'd stay quiet about it. But I didn't. I couldn't. And the moment I saw that lonely seat at table 18, I knew this wasn't about weddings or aesthetics or vibes. It was about a deeper truth. She no longer saw me as someone worth honoring. But she forgot one thing. I wasn't there for the show. I was there for her mother. And her mother would have never let me sit alone. The days leading up to the wedding should have been joyful, filled with laughter, last-minute nerves, and quiet sentimental moments. But for me, they were just revealing. I noticed the signs. Not just in what was said, but what wasn't. 3 days before the wedding, I arrived at Amanda's house with a warm pie and a gift in hand. I knocked twice. No one answered. Then I saw them through the kitchen window, her Clay and Clay's mother, sipping wine, flipping through what looked like table layout drafts. I stood there for a full minute before Amanda finally opened the door. "Oh, Jules, I forgot you said you'd drop by." She didn't invite me in. She didn't ask about the pie. She barely looked at the gift. Clay nodded politely, but his mother looked me over like I was the help, then went back to sipping her wine. "I'll just leave this here," I said softly, placing the box on the entryway table. Amanda didn't open it. She just smiled and said, "Thanks. We're just finalizing some details." Finalizing. That was the word she used when she erased me. That night, I went home and sat on the couch in silence, my hands still dusted with flour. Inside that unopened box was a delicate hand mirror, silver-plated, engraved with Amanda's name on one side, and her mother's initials on the other. It had belonged to my sister. I had been saving it for this day, and she didn't even open the box. The next day was the rehearsal dinner. I arrived on time, dressed carefully, not too loud, not too plain. I brought a small toast, prepared something heartfelt, not too long. But I never got to read it. Amanda gave a warm welcome to her father Clay's parents, and even her high school teacher. She asked each of them to stand, share a memory, receive applause. Me, I was asked to help check on the centerpieces. She gave me a clipboard and a polite smile, like I was part of the catering staff. I did it. Out of love, out of dignity, out of an old withering loyalty to a girl I once rocked to sleep. But inside, I felt something break, not in an angry, crashing way, but in the quiet snap of a rope stretched too far for too long. When Amanda raised a glass to the people who helped shape me, she looked past me. That was when I stopped listening. I excused myself before dessert, stepped outside, and took a walk around the parking lot. That's when I made the decision. No more tears. No more maybe she's just stressed. No more benefit of the doubt. She had forgotten who I was, not just in name, but in meaning. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had prepared with the photo of her and her mother. I had originally intended to leave it in her bridal suite, but now I had a different plan. Back inside, I found one of the servers, a sweet girl named Rosa, whose mother I once helped with rent after a bad car accident. I explained what I needed. No one will see, I promised. I just want it placed under her plate at the head table. Rosa didn't ask questions. She just nodded. The next morning, the wedding day, I ironed my dress, fixed my hair, and slipped the envelope into my purse with steady hands. Not out of spite, but out of something firmer than hurt. Clarity. When I arrived at the venue, the place was buzzing. Photographers, flowers, flashes of white. Amanda passed by me, once not stopping. Not even a glance. I gave Rosa the envelope in the hallway near the kitchen and said simply, slide it under her plate before dinner service. No one will notice. She nodded again. It was done. And I took my seat at table 18. I watched from the shadows as Amanda laughed, danced, toasted. I watched as the crowd swelled around her like a tide of admiration, but I wasn't part of it. And somehow that finally felt okay, because I knew what waited under her plate. A reminder, a message, a mirror. She thought she had written me out of her story, but I had left the final sentence. The clinking of forks on porcelain, the soft hum of conversation, the sparkle of wine glasses catching the light dinner at the reception had begun. Everyone seemed to melt into the warmth of celebration, except me. I watched from table 18 where the hum was duller, the air colder, the wine poured slower. I stirred my iced tea, slowly, eyes drifting toward the head table. Amanda was radiant, yes, but there was something hollow in her laughter. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was the silence between us, finally catching up to her. I waited. The main course was served steak, mashed potatoes, piped into stiff swirls, asparagus with lemon zest. Plates clattered, and conversations bloomed, but my eyes never left Amanda. Then it happened. She picked up her dinner plate. She was probably adjusting her napkin, or maybe leaning over to pass the salt. But the second she lifted it, I saw her freeze. Her body tensed, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I knew her well enough to read her posture. She found it. The cream envelope, the weight of her mother's memory. Amanda stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to touch it. Her new husband glanced at her puzzled, but said nothing. Finally, she lifted it from the table with cautious fingers and opened the flap. She pulled out the photo first. It was the picture I'd always loved her at age 5, in a sun hat too big for her head. Her arms wrapped around her mother's neck. They were both laughing, the garden blooming behind them. That moment forever frozen in color. I watched her blink. Then she turned it over. On the back in my handwriting, it read, "You made sure I sat alone. So I made sure you remembered who stood beside you when no one else did." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folded note beneath the photo. No one else at the table noticed. They were too busy talking, sipping, celebrating. She reached the final item, the check. Or rather, what remained of it. Torn perfectly down the center. $10,000. Shredded. Amanda looked up. Her eyes searched the room, and then they found me. There I was, sitting far across the floor, dressed in navy with a soft smile on my lips. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I let her see me. Really see me for the first time in years. She looked away quickly, her face flushing with something between embarrassment and recognition. Her shoulders dropped just a little, the stiff posture of pride beginning to soften under the weight of memory. She folded the letter carefully, then slipped it into her clutch without a word. She didn't speak to me the rest of the night. There was no dramatic confrontation, no apology, no tearful reunion under fairy lights. She danced, she laughed, she posed for photos, but I saw the difference. Her smile dimmed, her eyes wandered to table 18 more often than before. And when the speeches started, one from her father, one from her new in-laws, I sat quietly as a guest, not as family. And that, I realized, was no longer a punishment. It was a choice. I chose to be free of the performance, of pretending I wasn't wounded every time she overlooked me, of being invited only for appearance, not for presence. That note under her plate wasn't revenge. It was closure. A final whisper to the girl I once knew: you were loved. Fiercely. But even love must sometimes walk away. When the night ended and guests began to drift toward the exits, Amanda stood by the door with Clay, shaking hands, hugging guests. I passed them with my coat draped over my arm, my heels clicking softly against the floor. She looked at me. I paused. We held eye contact just for a second. Then I nodded and walked out into the cool night air. No fanfare, no final words, just peace. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's slipping a note under a plate, standing tall in silence, and letting someone else carry the weight of what they chose to forget. I didn't hear from her after the wedding. Not that week, not the next. Not even a polite thank you card. And you know what? I didn't need one. For the first time in years, I didn't sit by the phone wondering when or if she'd call. I didn't replay our last conversation. I didn't question whether I'd overreacted or been too sensitive. I didn't wonder if I should have just stayed quiet. I knew exactly what I'd done, and I knew exactly why I did it. Because when someone shows you again and again that they only see your value when it's convenient, you have two choices: shrink yourself or step away. I chose to step away. A week later, I spent the afternoon in my garden. I dug my hands into the dirt, planting new daffodil bulbs beneath the tree, where my sister's wind chime still hangs. It was one of those golden fall days where the air is crisp but forgiving, and the light feels softer than it should. I sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea and a book I'd been meaning to read for 3 years. And as I turned the pages, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet return to myself. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't when someone speaks cruelly, it's when they leave you out of their joy. When they decide you no longer fit in the pictures they're painting of their lives. And that's what Amanda had done. She edited me out. But what she didn't realize was this: I wasn't waiting to be loved anymore. I was done asking for space at a table I helped build. A month later, I got a letter. Not a call, not a text. A letter. Handwritten. It was short. Jules, I've been thinking about what you left me. I didn't realize how far apart we'd grown until I saw it. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry. Amanda. There were no excuses, no deflections, just the raw bones of regret. I read it once, then tucked it into the same box, where I kept the old photo, the one I'd slipped under her plate. I didn't write back, not yet. Some wounds take time, and I had already given so much of mine. I don't know what the future holds for Amanda and me. Maybe one day she'll show up on my porch with more than words. Maybe she'll remember who I was, who I am, and not just the version of me that fit the background of her wedding. Or maybe she won't, and I'll still be okay. Because I have my life. I have peace. I have people who see me not for what I give, but for who I am. I have a rose bush that blooms every spring, and a wind chime that sings her mother's song, and mornings where I wake up with no one's name on my tongue but my own. I didn't leave that envelope to hurt her. I left it to remind her that sometimes the people we take for granted are the ones who carried us when we couldn't stand on our own, and that forgetting someone isn't as quiet as we think. It echoes. It lingers. It leaves a note under your plate that you'll never forget. Have you ever been left out by someone you loved deeply? Have you ever given everything only to feel like you were nothing? Share your story in the comments. Let someone else know they're not alone, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.